She was just a girl from a forgotten neighborhood, a place where dreams didn't come true, where ambition was something you left at the doorstep because reality had other plans. The kind of place where poverty wasn't just a circumstance, it was a legacy. They laughed at her when she said she wanted more. Teachers told her to be realistic. Friends shook their heads. Even her own family, people who loved her, warned her not to get her hopes up too high. Because in their world, hope was dangerous. It set you up for disappointment. It reminded you of everything you could never have. But she didn't listen. She studied under the dim light of a street lamp when the electricity was cut. She borrowed books from neighbors because libraries weren't an option. She worked after school, not to save for college, but to keep food on the table. And every time someone told her she'd never make it, it fueled her fire even more. Then came the day that should have broken her. A letter. Thin, almost weightless in her trembling hands. She had applied to a university, against all odds, against all logic. She had poured everything into that application, and when she finally dared to open it, rejected. Not just rejected, they didn't even consider her a serious applicant. Her grades were good, but her background, her lack of connections. The unspoken truth was clear. Girls like her weren't meant to leave places like this. That night, she cried, not just for the lost opportunity, but for the bitter realization that maybe everyone had been right. Maybe she wasn't meant to succeed. Maybe this was where her story ended. But that's not what happened, because buried beneath the pain, beneath the exhaustion of fighting against a world that refused to see her worth, there was something else. A quiet, stubborn whisper inside her that said, no. No, this wasn't how her story would end. No, she wasn't going to accept a life she didn't choose. No, she wouldn't let the world tell her what she could and couldn't do. So she did something nobody expected. She started again. She found another way, and what happened next changed everything. She didn't have a roadmap, no clear path forward, but she had something else, an unshakable belief that if doors wouldn't open for her, she would build her own. So she started small. She took whatever jobs she could find, cleaning houses, waiting tables, tutoring kids after school. Every cent she made, she saved. While her friends spent weekends escaping reality, she spent hers studying. Not in a university library, but in the corners of second-hand bookstores, reading anything she could get her hands on. She found free courses online. She watched lectures late into the night, writing down notes as if she were sitting in the front row of a classroom she had never been allowed to enter. Then she got an idea. If the system wouldn't let people like her in, maybe the problem wasn't her. Maybe the problem was the system. She looked around her neighborhood and saw kids just like her, bright, hungry for knowledge, but trapped in the same cycle of poverty. She saw parents working 3 jobs and still struggling to buy school supplies. She saw teenagers dropping out, not because they weren't smart, but because surviving today mattered more than a diploma that might not change their tomorrow. So she made a decision. She would help them. At first, it was just a few kids sitting on the floor of a tiny, borrowed space. She taught them math, English, how to apply for scholarships, how to dream beyond the walls they had been born into. She didn't have much to offer, just her time, her knowledge, and the promise that they were capable of more than the world believed. People called her foolish. They told her it wouldn't make a difference, that poor kids don't escape poverty, they just learn to survive in it. But then, something incredible happened. One of her students, barely 14, the son of a struggling single mother, won a scholarship, a full ride to a high school that would change the course of his life. Then another, and another. One by one, they started breaking free. And soon, it wasn't just a small group of kids anymore. It was an entire movement. Word spread. More students showed up, desperate for a chance. Parents who once believed education was a luxury now saw a glimmer of possibility. What started as a handful of kids on a borrowed floor turned into something much bigger. But success comes with enemies. The people in power, the ones who benefited from keeping the poor in their place, started noticing her. At first, they dismissed her as just another dreamer who would burn out. But when dropout rates in the neighborhood started falling, when kids who were never supposed to have a future suddenly had options, they realized she was a problem. One day, she walked into the small room where she held her lessons and found it locked. The owner of the building had been pressured to evict her. No explanation, just a cold, impersonal notice on the door. She had no resources, no wealthy donors backing her, no safety net to fall on. But she still had her fire. So she moved the classes outside, under a tree, in alleyways, on the steps of abandoned buildings. Wherever there was space, she made it a classroom. And the students kept coming. Then came the threats. "Stop this. You're wasting your time. You don't belong here." She ignored them. Then came the warnings. "You're making powerful people angry. You should leave before it's too late." She still ignored them. And then, one night, she came home to find her small apartment ransacked, her books torn, her savings gone. A message left for her, loud and clear. She sat in the wreckage of everything she had built, heart pounding, hands shaking. For the first time in years, she wondered if she had made a mistake. Maybe the world wasn't ready to change. Maybe the cycle was too strong to break. Maybe they were right all along. And then, a knock at the door. She hesitated before opening it. Standing outside were her students, the kids she had fought for, the ones who once believed they were nothing, now looking at her the way she once looked at the world, with fire in their eyes. "We're not giving up," one of them said. And that was all she needed to hear. She didn't give up. Instead, she fought harder. She reached out online, telling her story to anyone who would listen. Strangers from around the world started donating, small amounts at first, then bigger ones. Enough to rent a new space. Enough to buy real books, real supplies. She built something no one could take away. And then, the moment she had been waiting for, one of her students, one of the very kids they said would never escape poverty, got accepted into university. Not just any university, a top-ranked institution, the kind of school that once felt like a world away. Then another student, and another. Years passed, and the ripple effect became unstoppable. The kids she once taught in alleyways, they became teachers, lawyers, doctors. They came back to help the next generation. What started as one girl's defiance had turned into a legacy. And those people who once laughed at her, the ones who told her she would fail, they watched in silence as she proved them wrong. Today, her program has helped thousands break free from the cycle of poverty. But if you ask her, she'll tell you this was never just about education. It was about proving that the world doesn't get to decide your worth, that no matter where you come from, no matter how many people say you can't, you can. And that's a lesson no one can take away.